Hello and welcome to my new channel called Stories of My Life. This introductory podcast is to explain the background to this channel. I am reading this off a script. I will interject some other pieces into it, but to get it exactly right, I am reading off a script. So in this introductory podcast, I want to explain the intended audience of the channel, why I'm presenting Stories of My Life, the reason behind me creating the channel, the purpose of the channel, which of course is highly related to the reasons for creating it, how the channel will be organized, and how the content will be monetized. So that's what I'm going to explain in the next hour or so, and this presentation will take about an hour. The intended audience. The intended audience of this channel is men in the age range of 16 to 30. Now, it might appeal to some men in the range 30 to 40, but I doubt it will appeal to men over the age of 40. If it does, all the better. But most men over 40 are set enough in their ways that they are not interested in hearing such stories as I will tell on this channel. So if you are a young man in the age range of 16 to 30, this channel is for you. I sincerely doubt any women are going to want to listen to what I have to say. Women have a better way of knowing, and they are not at all interested in hearing what a man has to say about life and how they might live a better life. Women expect to get a better life by lying to and manipulating some man into giving her what she wants, not by earning that better life for herself. That's what women want to do. So that is the intended audience. If you know young men from the ages 16 to 30, by all means let them know about the channel and the podcast that will be linked on Amazon. So, why present Stories of My Life? One of the most powerful ways of communicating knowledge about people and the art of being human is to present the information as a story. This is such an effective means of communication that virtually every culture across the world over history has communicated the lessons of the past to the younger generation using stories. They are called different things in different cultures. They have names such as legends or parables or dreamtime stories, but they all have a similar structure. It is a story presented that is interesting and entertaining to some extent, that carries some moral to the story that the listener can learn from and apply to his or her own life. Possibly the best known example in Western Christian culture is the Bible. The Bible is very much a series of stories. The Jesus character in the Bible constantly tells parables which communicate some form of lesson. There is the parable of the Good Samaritan, the parable of the man with the rebellious son. There is the consider the lilies of the field. The Bible is chock full of stories where the storyteller is communicating a message that is more likely to remain with the listener. On this channel and the associated podcasts, I will present Stories of My Life in a reasonably interesting and entertaining fashion. Most of the stories will have some form of lesson that I've learned from the story. Some of them will not. Some of them will just be good stories that are fun for me to repeat and tell, and hopefully fun for you to listen to. There will be an element of entertainment and fun on this channel. Sure, I want to pass along the stories of my life, but in doing that I will present them in an entertaining and fun way. So that interest in the stories is a little higher than otherwise might be. For the most part, I will leave out the names of the people involved and use pseudonyms for all the people involved. Those who know me well might recognize some of the characters, but for the wider audience who do not know me, there is no need for you to know the actual names of the people involved in order to get the story. So whenever you hear a name in any of my stories, you should consider the name is a pseudonym and not to take the name to mean anyone in particular, unless, of course, I say so. I will use Fred and Sue as the male and female pseudonyms just because they are my favourite and they're better than Jane and John Doe, right? That I actually know some people called Fred and Sue should not be taken as identifying those people when I use those standard pseudonyms, okay? So, the reason behind creating this channel. This is an interesting topic in and of itself, almost worthy of a whole separate podcast. There are a number of specific reasons, and I will go through them here. Firstly, many people know that I disowned my former sons, Jared Stephen Robinson and Joshua John Nolan. I also disown my former daughters, Kristen Robinson and Josephine Marguerite Nolan, but that is less of an issue because they are beyond all redemption or any hope of being decent people at any time in their lives. The lads are not. There is good in the lads, but that good has been suppressed by the high level of man-hatred in the West. Because I have disowned them, they lost their chance to ask me questions and to learn from the vast array of experiences I have had. In my opinion, a lad, or even a man, losing his father means that he has lost the single most important person in his life in terms of who can guide him and advise him in his life. Only a father knows the son so well that he is able to give the very best of advice to the son over the son's adult life. A father knows the vast majority of life experiences of the son, and so can present advice in the light of that experience. Jared and Joshua were robbed of the opportunity to ask my advice over the remainder of their adult lives. They will have to look elsewhere. This channel will, to a small extent, provide both Jared and Joshua the resource of being able to listen to the stories of my life and take from those stories that which is valuable to them in their lives. Secondly, it may turn out to be the case that some children are unlucky enough to be born to Jared, Joshua, Kristen or Josephine. Who knows? Certainly I would have sincere sympathy for any child unlucky enough to be born to Kristen or Josephine, but I certainly have no say as to whether any man is crazy enough to do that. After all, a prostitute in Melbourne who claims to have had sex with 10,000 men claims to have received more than 1,000 marriage proposals. There are always plenty of scumbag low-life men willing to have sex with even the most degenerate of women. There is no shortage of loser mangina beta men who would quite happily have sex with the most disgusting and disgraceful of women, and if a baby ensues, that is simply bad luck for that baby. So while I was in jail in Germany and thinking about what I would do when I got out, one idea that struck me was that should any poor unfortunate child be unlucky enough to have one of these four criminals as their parent, that child would want to know the answers to such questions as, who is my grandfather? What was he like? Why did my grandfather disown my parent? What might I learn from such a man? I think of this because I think of my own grandfathers. I have no memory at all of my father's father, none. I am told he died when I was 5 or so, and I wonder why I did not have any memory of him at all. I was told he died in a car accident. I only found out many years later that this was a lie. Thomas Nolan committed suicide by running his car engine in a garage and asphyxiating himself. When I found out about this lie, I asked my mother why I had been lied to all my life. Why was I not told the truth? That the man had committed suicide at the age of 55. Her claim was that my father and her did not wish any of us young boys to know the truth for fear that we might finish up going the same way. An interesting comment, since I was suicidal at the age of 44 and very, very, very nearly finished up the same way. My mother's father I do remember only very slightly. My only memory of him was the time when my father bought a fitness tool which was called a bull worker. This was an all-purpose tool that could help men build some muscles. I believe I was about 5 at the time. The idea of the machine was that it had a pneumatic centre that you had to compress as part of your workout. You might have seen pictures of these things. They were very popular back in the day. As a 5-year-old, I could not even make the machine compress one little bit, even when I put my full weight on it. So I asked my grandfather to show me how it worked. He picked it up and compressed it to its full extent behind his head. That's what he did. Right behind his head, he compressed this thing to its full extent. As a 5-year-old boy, I was suitably impressed, so I asked him if I could feel the muscles in his arm. Grandfather Castle was a big man, and he'd been a shearer of sheep for much of his adult life. His arms were like mountains of muscles to me. I prodded and poked his muscles, and I could not believe what I was seeing. He invited me to punch his muscles in his arms, so I did, and I hurt my hand. His muscles were tougher than my knuckles, and I was a good fighter for a 5-year-old. So as I was standing there in wonder at the size and strength of my grandfather, he grabbed me with one hand around my waist and threw me up in the air, all in one motion. He caught me with 2 hands and settled me back down on the ground again. I was so impressed. I mean, wow, that was really impressive for a 5-year-old, right? So obviously he occurred to me as a huge man, much bigger than my father. And that is all I know of him. I'm told he died of a heart attack in my parents' kitchen right in front of my mother. I'm told that my mother had nervous problems for many years following such a tragic event happening right in front of her. I don't know if this is true or not, because obviously my mother and father never talked about it. I do recall that Mum was strange for some time, forgetful. I only found out after I left home that she had developed a dependency on Valium after the death of her father, something that is easy to understand and deserves full sympathy and empathy. So when I was 12, my mother's mother, Nana Castle, was getting serious with the man that she had met. I was very keen that she would marry so I would have another grandfather. Yep, I was 12 and I was selfish enough that I wanted my grandmother to marry so I could have a grandfather. Boys can be like that, right? yeah, I want a grandfather, so you have to get married, right? Boys can be like that. They did duly marry when I was 12, and I really wanted to get along with my new grandfather. I wanted to know all about him and learn from him, whatever he was willing to teach me. My father had told me I was lucky to have this man as my grandfather, and that if I was very lucky, he might tell me about his life, and that I might learn. His name was Frank Trainer, and he was an ex-soldier from World War II, an Anzac, a digger. In these days, in the 70s, Anzacs were the most highly respected men in Australia. The Anzacs were getting on by the 70s, and we all had a sense that they would not be with us forever. So we had this sense that we must learn the lessons of their lives before it was too late. The Anzac Day Parade was the premier event in my town. Our whole town would turn out for the Anzac Day Parade. To miss the Anzac Day Parade was to be socially vilified for the next year. To miss the parade was seen as a massive mark of disrespect and lack of gratitude for what these men had done for us. It was drilled into us as children. If not for these brave men and their fallen comrades, you would be living in abject slavery under Japanese occupation. That's what we were told when we were small children by our parents, and of course we believed it. Now I remember as a lad, I would go to the Anzac Day Parade every year. When I was about 7, my father told me that these are the greatest men who ever lived, and that if I was ever lucky enough to have an Anzac speak to me, I must listen to the great man. I used to go to their two-up games in the afternoon and just sit and listen and watch them play their games of two-up, drink beer and talk to each other. Now, these are emotional memories for me, and a part of what I want to do on this channel is let the emotions show. The tradition on Anzac Day was that no Anzac had to buy a drink, meaning a beer. The young men would buy the Anzacs all the food and drink they asked for as they played their games of two-up. Two-up was a game of chance where 3 coins were tossed in the air. Often the young men would give an Anzac who was losing at the game more money to play with. These Anzac days are buried into my memory, are burned into my memory. I guess all the boys I grew up in this era in Australia have similar memories of the old men marching with their chests out, their medals on their chests, and that look in their eye that only returned veterans have. And here I was 12 and I had an Anzac for a grandfather. Wow, how could I be around him more and learn from the great man? So, being an enterprising lad, when my new grandfather, Frank Trainer, and Nana Castle moved into a new council house, I immediately offered to mow the lawns for them and to keep the garden green. Obviously, both Nana Castle and Uncle Frank knew that what I really wanted, so they played along with the idea that I just wanted to mow the lawns. My father would drop me with the lawnmower at my Nana's place and I would mow the lawns. He would be due back in 2 hours or so, but often he was later, and I would take the opportunity between finishing my chores and my dad picking me up to talk to Uncle Frank, and as he asked us to call him. Uncle Frank showed respect to my real grandfathers by asking us to call him Uncle and not grandfather, not granddad. Within a few months, Uncle Frank had christened me with a nickname that stuck with me until he died. Indeed, stuck with me many years after he died. He called me Have a Chat. That was his nickname for me, Have a Chat. He loudly proclaimed he had never met a kid that always wanted to chat so much as me. Of course, he claimed this in jest because he knew exactly why I always wanted to have a chat. Even though I was only 12, and I was obviously very ignorant of the world, he tolerated me. I do not know, excuse me, I do not know how many thousands of questions I asked him over the 6 years I mowed his lawns, but to his eternal credit, I never once saw him show any sign that he was tired of me asking him questions and listening to the stories he told me in those spaces when I was waiting for my dad to pick me up. One of the most enduring stories of my life, which I will put as a separate story, was Frank Trainer telling me about his fallen comrades, and that story is pivotal to my life. I say all that in this opening as background for one major reason. I have decided to create stories of my life. Because any children unfortunate enough to be born to my former children will never get the chance to come and mow my lawns and sit at my knee and have the experience that I had with Frank Trainer. For this, I mourn their loss, because for me, those minutes are some of the most precious and valuable minutes of my life. I am every bit the Anzac that Frank Trainer and his fallen comrades were, and due to the cowardice of their parents, any children born to those four criminals will not get to experience that Anzac spirit firsthand. I can barely imagine a greater loss to a young boy. I would not be the man I am without the minutes and hours I spent with Frank Trainer. Even though the time was short, Frank Trainer remains the second most influential man in my life after my former father. So I will record these stories of my life so that should my former children have children, those who would have had me for a grandfather, those children will get a chance to listen to the sort of stories Frank Trainer told me. Stories that shaped me as a man. Stories that put steel in my back, flint in my eye, that I would never surrender, never quit, never say die, until my last breath was ripped from my body by death himself. That's basically why I'm making this series of audios. Thirdly, many people who have followed my work over the years know of my time at Landmark Education in 1995. In 1995, I was down at the centre 2 nights a week minimum for the whole year. I was working on what does it mean to be related, and how does one generate relationships. This came out of my love for my wife, who was treating me terribly. I wanted both of us to learn how to be better related such that we could live in peace and harmony. By 1994, I wanted to divorce Jennifer, but we had 2 small children. Jennifer was being horrible and nasty to me every day of the week. She had even fed my food to the dog to teach me the lesson I should come home from work earlier, even though I was the sole income earner for the family. And I'll put that in a separate story, but yes, in 1993 there was a huge recession and IBM was doing extremely poorly, and at the end of 1993, in my particular area, 50% of my colleagues were let go. 50% were pink-slipped in 1993. So during 1993, when I had 4 children to care for and a non-working wife, I worked my ass off to make the cut, to be able to pay for the house and the food and everything that the family needed. And how did my wife reward me? She fed my food to the dog. That's what she actually did. When I told that story when I was in Ghana, I spent some time in Ghana working for a large client, and I told that story to the girls who worked in the restaurant in the hotel I was in. They simply could not believe the concept that a wife would make food for the whole family and then give the food for the man who was working to the dog. They just flat out didn't believe me, right? So yeah, she was nasty enough to feed my food to the dog, right? And she also claimed she renounced her Christian religion in 1993, something she had proclaimed very loudly all through her teen years and through our courtship. So to renounce Christianity after the children were born was something that was terrible for me to contemplate. The eternal souls of our children were at risk because of a selfish mother. I prayed every day from the day she told me to the day we agreed to divorce, more than 13 years, that she would take up the religion we married in again, if not for her own sake, then for the sake of the children, and she flatly refused. There will be many stories on this channel that have to do with Landmark Education and what I got out of it, because it has been central to my life for 20 years now. We're coming up to 2015, and I did the Landmark Forum in February 1995, so coming up 20 years. One of the most amazing stories I will tell is how a young man told me that apart from his father and mother, I had done more for him than anyone else in his life by enrolling him in the Landmark Forum. I was very shocked when he told me, but I could see that he was honest and that he really meant it. I realised the enormous gift and power that I had been granted by my Creator. I, literally, had the gift of transforming the quality of a young man's life by persuading him that the Landmark Forum was something that he was well advised to do. I went on to enrol many hundreds of people into the Landmark Forum, every one of which was massively grateful for my time and effort in being willing to put myself out there and talk to them about the issues of their life. Many people say, in business, we must never talk about personal issues. I find this a very sad state of affairs. We are not robots, and our personal lives have a great deal to do with our business lives. Many say that to talk about personal lives at work is to show weakness in a competitive environment. I have seen exactly the opposite. I have seen that talking about personal issues at work has always brought forth a greater level of kindness and humanity from my customers and colleagues. Some people pretend to be offended, sure, but they never work against me, while those I have told a personal story to have been supportive and helpful. One example? At one point, all 4 of our children had chickenpox, one after another. I had so little sleep over a 12-week period that my eyelids were twitching. Literally, my eyelids were twitching. I was so tired. And I was doing a sales call on another man who also happened to be called Peter, right? And he looked at me strangely and said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Well, look, I have to confess, I am very tired. I have 4 children and they have all had chickenpox in a row. And I take the night shift, so I have not had a good night's sleep in 12 weeks or more. I apologise for being so tired. It's not my intent. Please forgive me." And it was so funny. Peter just burst out laughing. As I tell this story, I can see his face and I can see him bursting out laughing. And he said to me, "Do you know I have 5 children?" And I told him, no, he'd never told me that. And he said, "Look, come with me to the coffee shop. I'll buy you a strong cup of coffee." And so we went to the coffee shop. I mean, he bought me that coffee and he proceeded to tell me of how many sleepless nights he had had with small children and how tired he had been for so many years when his children were small. We did not say one more word about the proposal I'd come to discuss. I went back to the office feeling both good and bad. The meeting had gone well, of course, on a personal level, and he was an important man and my customer, but I'd not even presented the proposal, let alone persuaded him to buy it. So I'm figuring I have to go back, right? So it was with great surprise a week later that I received an email from him letting me know that he had read over the papers I had left with him, and he decided that he wanted to do all the work in the proposal plus some. And I was quite confused at that because we didn't even get to talk about the proposal. I went over to his office to thank him personally for the order. As I was getting up to leave, he was seeing me from his office, I asked him the question we were always trained to ask at this stage. "If you do not mind me asking, why did you buy this order?" He looked me in the eye and said, "I can see you are a good man. You love your kids. And us good fathers have to make each other look good at work for the sake of the children, right?" That's what he said. Words very close to that. Us good fathers have to stick together. We need to make each other look good for the sake of the kids, yeah? And he gave me a wink and a smile. His message was clear. Fathers who worked hard and did their best for their children were worthy of getting preferential treatment in sales situations because it was clear that the benefit of the sale would go to the children. That was my first brush with the idea that senior business managers in very large companies would give preference to a father selling a deal where the value of the deal would also be transmitted to the wife and children in some measure. Sure, it is discrimination on the basis of marital status and family status. Of course it's discrimination, okay? The man is making a decision based on discriminating factors, i.e. factors which let him know that this guy is likely to be working harder and longer than the next guy, right? But everyone knows that a man who is a father who has 4 children to feed is going to work harder, work longer, and work better than a man who is single. Okay, I've seen fathers get preferential treatment in promotions and pay rises since I started work in 1982. When I asked about this preferential treatment, the answers were always along the lines of, "He needs some money." Really, he needs the money more. He has a wife and children. Of course, single men are far more likely to resign and move on from a job than a man with a wife and children to support. You really have to do something very bad for a man with a wife and children to support for him to resign his job. A single man can resign any time he likes because his income far exceeds his expenses and he always has plenty of money in the buffer. A single man can go months without a job while collecting unemployment benefits. A father with a non-working wife and 4 children can barely go a week without a job to produce income because generally he has debts and no spare cash at all. And I can absolutely vouch for that's the case. When you're the sole income earner for a family of 6, you don't have cash on hand. You have credit card debt on hand. That's how that goes. Okay. So once I had done the Landmark Forum, I was more willing to be open about personal issues as and when appropriate in the work environment. I was criticised by some people for doing this, but the vast majority thanked me profusely. Further, by doing so, I had won a great deal of respect with ongoing income as a result of being willing to mention personal issues in the work environment. It was with some surprise that I found out that one of the personal issues that people do not wish to be discussed in the business environment is the criminal abuse of men in the family law courts. That subject is taboo. You can talk about anything else, but you cannot talk about how men are criminally treated in the family law courts in the work environment. I recall I was working for one of the world's largest companies and I was asked, "Are you married?" In the past, my answer had been, of course, "I'm very happily married and I have 4 children." This has always been greeted with very positive responses, of course. This time I said, "I'm very happily divorced." You could almost see the negativity rising up in my customer. So I asked him, "Why is it a problem for you that I'm very happily divorced?" He stammered that it was not a problem for him at all, but it very, very clearly was, right? So over time, I have noticed that men who say, "I am miserable in divorce," get great support and approval on a social level in the business environment. But men who say, "I am very happily divorced," get very negative responses. I've noticed that. So now I simply say, "I am divorced. It's very common now, you know," to disarm the whole discussion. So with that background for you to know about, it will come as no surprise to you that over the years, many young men in the business environment have come to me privately and said, "I see you as a father figure," or similar. I have had, quite literally, many men hug me and cry on my shoulder and thank me profusely for what I've done for them in the business environment. Not in just the social environment, but in the business environment. The first time it happened was 2000, and I was quite taken aback because the man was 10 years older than me. But since then, it has become quite a common occurrence, and I take it in my stride. I establish strong relationships with men in the business environment, and they see me as a trusted advisor and father figure. One of the most amazing of these happened in 2010. I'd been on site at a client on and off for 2 years. As is normal, we had a farewell party when it was time for me to move on. The young man in question, I will call him Fred, had to walk to the train station near the bar where we went in order to go home. My hotel also required me to walk past the train station, so we walked to the station together. We were both a little the worse for wear for the night. We had plenty to eat and plenty to drink, and we had a merry old time. You know, it was a farewell party. And it was a lovely going away party from a group that I had very fond memories of. When we got to the station, I turned to put my hand out to shake the young man's hand to say one last farewell. He leapt forward and gave me what could only be called a bear hug, and told me thank you so much for being there for the last 2 years. He said, "You are the father I wish I had." I was very touched and very grateful for the acknowledgement. I had no idea I had such an impact on the lad, as he was a quiet achiever. He was very good at his job, but he was also very quiet about going about his work. So I know from first-hand experience that there are many young men out there who wish to have someone put the stories of my life out there where they can see them, but are reluctant to come forward and actually say that they want this or that they need this. Young men today are very reluctant to be seen to be asking for help or asking for advice because they have been lied to and told it is a sign of weakness. One of the great lessons Frank Trainer taught me when I was a lad was this. He said to me words almost exactly as this. He said, "Asking for advice is a sign of strength. It marks you are a great man. Never let anyone tell you any different." It's one of the things Frank Trainer said to me. Asking for advice is a sign of strength. It marks you are a great man. Never let anyone tell you any different. Come straight off the battlefield. Of course, Frank Trainer was right. Naturally, when a lad is 12 years old, okay, when you're 12 years old and asking an Anzac to share the stories of his life and learning from an Anzac, that's only natural. No 12-year-old would ever have the arrogance to imagine that he could tell an Anzac anything he did not already know. And so I never presumed to tell Frank Trainer anything. I soaked up anything he was willing to say like a sponge. But young men today, they do not ask for advice and guidance. Instead, they are so arrogant, they actually try and give advice and guidance to men like me. Can you imagine the level of hubris it must take for a man in his 20s to think that he has some advice that might be of value to me? I mean, can you imagine the hubris that takes? And that's mostly what young men do to me when I talk to them, is try and give me advice and tell me what I should be doing rather than listening. The old STFU, shut up and listen. And yet, thousands and thousands of young men online have seen fit to waste their time and mine pretending that they can give me some advice that might actually have some value to me. Amazing. Not that it is not possible. Wisdom occurs everywhere. If you listen for it, you might just hear it. But it does not occur in young men anymore very often. Young men refuse to ask for advice and guidance. Young men refuse to ask for the advice and guidance they need in their lives in the vast majority. It is almost like scarcity is taken as a sign of value. When I was 12, getting time with an Anzac, that was scarce. You didn't get time with an Anzac. We all had our lives to live, and so getting an Anzac to talk to you was an honour and a privilege for you. Of course, the leading thinkers of the day, it was impossible to get them to talk to you. That is what books were for. A man would write down his thoughts in a book, and you could buy the book from the bookshop if you wanted to hear what the great man had to say. The cassette recorder stepped that up a bit, in that men could also give lectures on cassettes. We could also record a radio interview on a cassette. In this way, we could listen to what a man had to say without him being there to say it. The actual sound of his voice could be disconnected with his time, and we thought that was amazing in the 70s. That was just fantastic. In those days, we gave value to the words men said that we could learn from. Whether it was in books or on cassettes, we knew that if we were taking the time to listen to what a man had to say, that we felt his words were important, and therefore we should pay the price of the book or the cassette. If we could not afford the book, we could always go to the library. Look how differently young men view the world today. They think the words of men like me should be presented to them for free. This has had a very insidious side effect on men devaluing the words that are said down to zero as well. It has had an even more insidious side effect in that young men think their words are just as valuable as the words of their elders and betters because they have devalued the words of their elders and betters down to zero. Okay, so the dynamic is, these words are available for free, therefore the value is zero. The value of my words is also zero and also available for free, therefore what I say has equal value to what older, better men have to say. Completely fallacious, right? This is one reason why I will also monetize these stories. Young men would do very well to train themselves to pay for things that they see are of value. Not because the person they are paying is greedy and selfish, but because paying for things that you value instills the value of those things in your own mind. Do not pay for things that are of value instills the idea that things are of no value and have the same value as things that are of value, and this will dull the desire of a man to learn and improve himself. There is also the issue of 5 quick tips to learn XYZ. This has been a disaster of biblical proportions to young men. It has instilled in them the idea that there is a quick fix to learn almost anything, and there isn't. This isn't true. The 5 tips to do anything visits on a young man the idea that he does not have to work hard and think hard in order to improve himself. That personal improvement, personal transformation, is somehow just one more blog entry away. It is not. Personal improvement and transformation is an ongoing life's work. When I first started at IBM when I was 22, and that was 1986, I put a sign up on my desk and it said, quote, "To be average scares the hell out of me," end quote. People would walk by and nod and say, "You know, you're right about that." And yet today, men aspire to be average, to be part of the crowd, to never shine above others, to never stand out in the crowd. And when they see someone doing so, they attack that person because they know that they can never be like that. That is why I am attacked online so often by men. I'm attacked by men who know they can never be like me. This is especially so now that my track record is so widely known. So the third reason to put up the stories of my life is so that any young man who wishes to improve himself can listen to these stories and take from them what he will. With the internet and cell phones that can play speech forever on a battery charge, the ease at which men can download these valuable stories and listen to them as they go about whatever else they are doing is so great as to make it a no-brainer. Men have the opportunity now to buy a $20 USB music player and put podcasts on it and to listen to it while driving to and from the gym and while working out at the gym itself. No matter where a man goes, he can play an MP3 and be in learning mode. That's amazing. That's just truly amazing. How I wish things were that easy to learn when I was a lad. The closest we had was cassette players, which were large and bulky, and you most certainly could not take them jogging, right? I sincerely believe that there is a great deal of good to be done for young men by them listening to these stories of my life. As much good as Frank Trainer did me by talking with me and telling me his stories when I was a teen boy. I just hope that more young men will see the value of such information being presented to them so they can improve the quality of their lives as Frank Trainer improved the quality of my life. Next, I want to discuss the purpose of the channel. Obviously, following on from all I have said, the purpose of the channel is to provide an education resource that is very specific, the stories of my life. I will not put other people's materials on this channel, unless there is a specific offer at the end. When something is more general in nature, I will put it on the MBA Education channel. I might also put things on my personal Global Man channel and my personal Kickass channel. But on this channel, and in these podcasts, I will very much put the stories of my life and no more. I might need some reminding that is the purpose of this channel should I stray, right? The idea is not to create content endlessly for just a few subs as I do on my personal Global Man channel. The idea is to create timeless advice that is not linked to any current events so that no matter when a lad listens to the podcast, it will be relevant to him. It will lend itself to a wider audience. Meaning that if you listen to this, if you're a young man, it's 2015 today, if you're listening to this in 20 years' time, 2035, and you're a young man in your 20s, this should be just as relevant for you in 20 years' time as it is today. Hopefully we haven't blown up the world by then, right? So this channel will also entertain to an extent. Young men today insist on being entertained as part of being educated. Personally, I find this a disaster of biblical proportions as well. If simply listening to a man's voice teaching you things is not entertainment enough, then you, as a young man, are well advised to think very seriously about your attitude towards learning. If you need to be entertained while you learn, then you are creating a very big opportunity for failure to hear the things that are most valuable to you to hear, because you will refuse to listen if you are not being entertained. If you want a very good example of how insidious and how wasteful the concept of "I want to be entertained while I am learning something" is, I can give you no better example than this, the YouTube channel of Sandman. You can see it on this link, and I'll put the link in the drop-down bar. Now, I have nothing against Sandman per se. He is providing a product that men wish to consume. But look at the product, and what does it say about the men who wish to consume it? It says a lot, right? If you eat saccharin, then don't expect nourishment, right? Sandman has set out to make his channel a commercial success. For that, he deserves full credit. Jenna Marbles also set out to make her YouTube channel a commercial success, and just look at the value of her content. I know 7-year-old boys who could produce more valuable content than Jenna Marbles does. But because she's female, and only a 5 at best, she has 16 million subs watching her foolishness once a week. The fact that Jenna Marbles has 16 million subs is a sad, sad reflection on young men today. That's what that is. Sandman is presenting information that is new to a lot of young men. At the time of writing this script, he has 15,000 subs with 3 million views. But what is that information really? And what value does it really have? And what of using pictures of sexy women to present it? Now, if Sandman's purpose is to make money on YouTube, just like Jenna Marbles, then he is to be applauded for what he's doing, just like Jenna Marbles is to be applauded for what she is doing, and for being so successful at the task of making money. But Sandman presents himself to an extent, not only as, but to an extent, that he's wishing to give men their daily dose of red pills, which will in some way benefit the men who are his subs. To the extent that he presents himself like this, he is quite hypocritical, because the vast majority of information he presents has about the same value as Jenna Marbles' videos. Entertaining, to be sure, no criticism that they're not entertaining. Sandman and Jenna Marbles both make entertaining videos, but they are pretty much completely devoid of any value that could be taken away and used by the young man. Most of Sandman's videos have the intellectual value of an episode of the Flintstones. And hell, when I was a lad, I watched the Flintstones too. They were entertaining. But even as a 6-year-old, I did not kid myself that I was actually going to learn anything of value from the Flintstones, right? And, if you think you're going to learn things of value from Sandman, you want to take another look and see what exactly you can take away from that. And of course, Jenna Marbles is the world's best example of a large number of subscribers with absolutely no value being presented, apart from entertainment. The Simpsons is very entertaining, and The Simpsons is very popular too. But popularity does not make value for the person receiving it. Popularity makes value for the advertisers, right? Who are trying to sell you stuff. Anyhow, around that time, when I was watching The Flintstones, when I was 8 or 9, a new show came on TV. No one knew what to make of it. It was called MASH, 4077th MASH. There had never been a show like it before, and if you ask me, there's never been a show like it since. It is almost the perfect psyop show to make men out of boys, and I was so lucky to see it during my formative years. There's even one episode where Ron Howard plays a 16-year-old soldier on MASH in the first season or second season. So even Ron Howard was on MASH. Now, if you're a young man and you do not know about MASH, you can always buy a copy of the series or even get it on download from the web. MASH was so unusual that after 3 seasons, the owners of the idea decided that it was never going to be a hit show and sold the rights to it for peanuts. Okay, true story. MASH was sold for peanuts. Of course, MASH went on to be the biggest hit series of its time, and it ran for 11 years. When it was ended, it was not because it was no longer popular, and as has happened for shows like Happy Days. Everybody in my age group knows the episode of Fonzie Jumps the Shark. And jumping the shark has become synonymous in our language with, it's dead, Jim, put a fork in it, right? When something has just gone on for too long and has lost its popularity, it is said to have jumped the shark. And that's a reference to a Happy Days episode where Fonzie jumps the shark trying to keep interest in the series up. So that didn't happen to MASH. Okay, MASH was pulling more viewers than it had ever pulled in its last season. The final show of MASH was the most watched TV show in history outside sporting events like the Super Bowl. So MASH, the goodbye, farewell, amen, the final show, was at the time the most watched television show in the history of the world, right? Apart from the Super Bowl and things like that. So no, MASH was pulled at the height of its popularity. Now, MASH ended when it was time to end it, and not to carry on past its use-by date. Now, what was so unusual about MASH was the mix of humour, misery, pathos, and tragedy. No one had ever tried to do that in a TV show before. Nobody had ever tried to hit so many emotions from the viewer, if they were even barely human, and had even the hardest of hearts. The famous Henry Blake Abyssinia episode where Henry finally gets to go home to Mildred and his wife and his kids, but was tragically killed en route, drew thousands of complaints and outrage at the emotional effect of this tragedy on the audience of tens of millions who watched it. What made MASH so different was that it was a show with a message, a show that a young man could watch and see all aspects of being a man played out in front of him. The bravery, the courage, the self-doubt, the introspection, the insane conditions, and getting the job done anyway. MASH had it all. It was just one of those shows for its time. MASH had it all. And today, what do we have? We have Big Brother and other reality shows completely devoid of any such message of morality, any such message of how to be a better man, any messages of the greatness of humanity in general and men in particular. We are seeing the same played out on popular YouTube channels. They are sugar-coated with images of sexy women, as in the case of Sandman, but the intellectual content is next to non-existent. Now, I do not blame Sandman for this. He's grown up in a world that can only be described as saccharine. It is not even sugar, it has so little value. Then young men say, we do not have any role models to look up to, no role models to learn from. Well, you are not going to find a role model in a man who covers up the fact his work is intellectually bankrupt by hiding that fact behind photos of sexy women. Sure, on this channel I'm going to test out using public domain pictures of sexy women and see if that makes any difference at all. Hopefully it will not, right? Hopefully the few experiments of putting out slideshows of sexy women won't make any difference at all. But we shall see. It is one more experiment that I hope to try out. A man who is a role model is going to present his message like MASH presented its message, with the warts and all showing. Why? Because that is intellectual honesty. And if men are looking for role models, then your first criteria should be, what is the level of intellectual honesty, honour and integrity of this man I'm going to give my time and attention to? If you want to be entertained by images of sexy women while being presented with information that any 12-year-old could type up, be my guest. If you want to miss out on the most important information you could possibly learn in your life because you do not wish to read a book, be my guest. It is your life and it is you who will pay the price for your choice of ignorance. And today, ignorance is a choice. When I was young, gaining knowledge was hard work. You had to sit down and read a book, right? You wanted to gain knowledge when I was a kid, you sat down and you read a book. When I was 7, my parents bought the World Book Encyclopedia. It took me 5 years to read it. I read it front to back. I read every page of the World Book Encyclopedia when I was a kid. Don't remember it all, but I remember a lot of it. So, the undertaking of reading an encyclopedia from front to back was a large undertaking. And that's how you get to learn. When I was young, that's how you get to learn things. You read a book, okay? Today, it is much easier to listen to things. This ability to do podcasts makes learning things much easier. You don't have to actually sit still under a light with a book in front of you, right? You can learn on the go by listening to podcasts. So today, ignorance is a choice. You cannot be ignorant by accident. You have to choose to be ignorant today. So yes, this channel is about presenting some of the most important information you will ever hear in the form of stories of my life. It will be done in an entertaining and pleasant way while being intellectually honest about that enterprise. The information will be presented in voice only so that it will be easy to consume via any MP3 capable device such as a phone, tablet or music player. On YouTube I will have my photo on some podcasts and I'll experiment with the sexy pictures just for the fun of it, right? Now, how will the channel be organised? The way that I will record stories of my life will be Audacity using a USB headset to get the best sound quality for my voice. I will record at 128, which is more than good enough for voice, while still being small enough for podcast downloads. The podcast will be released on the YouTube channel as well as to Amazon. On YouTube, the podcast will be released on a regular basis. I'll then package up bundles of 10 and put them up for sale on Amazon. These will be priced very cheaply to encourage young men to buy the podcasts and download them. Of course, it is possible to strip the MP3 out of the YouTube video and download it. Those who wish to avoid paying for the podcast like that are welcome to do so, just as long as they remember how that will subvert in their own minds how they perceive value of knowledge. If you download the YouTube video, strip it out, and listen to it on an MP3 without paying for the podcast, just remember you're taking the position that knowledge should be free, okay? And then you should also remember that in doing so, you should expect other people to behave to your words or their words in the same way under the natural law of do unto others. So if you choose to refuse to pay for the podcasts, download them legitimately, give me $5 for 10 podcasts, and say, no, that should be free, then when you speak, when you create something, you should understand that you have already agreed that everything you do should also be for free, right? Now, if I bother, I might group the podcasts so that people can more easily find specific podcasts because of the expected growth over time. I expect that many hundreds of podcasts will eventually be created, and there needs to be a better way of organising them and tagging them than we have today with YouTube. Next, how the content will be monetised. I wish to be very clear that I expect this enterprise to be a moneymaker over time. As more young men come to realise that they actually do have a few men who are willing to be role models for them, I hope that young men will decide to listen and learn from those who actually have something to teach them, rather than continue to be distracted by saccharin sold via eye candy. On YouTube, I will place ads. I have tested the approach of donate, and it is clear that men do not wish to donate money to other men. A woman can start a Kickstarter for a project called How to Make a Better Man, and she will get $100,000 in backing in a few weeks, mostly from men, by the way, okay? But if a man started a Kickstarter project called How to Make a Better Woman, and everyone will call him a woman hater for doing so. And this is the reality of the level of man hatred and female idolatry that goes on in the West today. Men must be improved. You're not good enough. Men must be improved. Women are already perfect, and there is nothing that could possibly be improved about a woman other than the way she looks. Because we all know there is a cosmetic industry that is worth about 10 billion euros a year. The very fact that women will spend more than 10 billion euros on cosmetics and cosmetic alterations to their bodies rather than spend €5 reading a book called How to Be a Good Wife tells all young men how women believe they are best advised to entrap a young man into the slavery situation called marriage. And it is not by improving her brain, right? Just stop and think about this for a minute. Women spend 10 billion euros a year on cosmetics and cosmetic surgery, or more. I don't know what the number exactly is, but it's at least 10 billion, right? To improve how they look, right? To, in their opinion, improve how they look. And they claim, I'm only doing it for myself, which is complete rubbish. But they will not read a book called How to Be a Good Wife. You as a young man, you should understand what that tells you. You should really get it, right? Women see that the way to entrap a young man into the slavery situation called marriage is through cosmetics, not through improving her brain, right? That's what women see. So ads it is on YouTube. Where a story is longer than 10 minutes, there will be ads placed every 10 minutes, just like there is on TV shows. For decades now, a half-hour TV show has had ads at the 10-minute marks worked into the script. I will not go to the bother of cutting the ads as I have done in some of my longer presentations and how I did on How to Be a Good Wife. That does not seem to be wanted or appreciated. The ads will pop up on the 10-minute mark just like Bernard Chapin does, and that will be good enough for the time being. On Amazon, these podcasts will be sold in packages of 10. The expected price will be $5 Australian, which is the price of one small Starbucks coffee. With inflation, possibly not even that. If a man is not willing to spend 50 cents on a podcast for a story of my life, then he's not a man that I'm interested in educating. Why? Because he has not learned the first lesson, that knowledge has a cost. If he thinks knowledge should be free, he's welcome to continue to think that, and welcome to have the benefit of the words, and welcome to not have the benefit of the words I put out there. I will also promote the products and services for companies that I'm an affiliate for. So, an offer to those who want to offer me advice, okay? Over the years, a lot, and I mean a lot of young men have offered me useless advice. The hubris that it takes for a man who is in his 20s to offer unsolicited advice to a man in his 50s and has children older than the young man is astonishing, just astonishing. But it has not stopped the lads from offering such advice. So here is my offer to those young men who want to offer me advice on how to improve the videos of this channel or improve the stories I put up on this channel. You are offered the opportunity, and offered with my blessing. Buy the MP3 of any presentation I put on this channel, cost you 50 cents. Transcript it in any way you please, summarize it, do whatever you want to it, okay? Then put it into a video with whatever you want, okay? Take my words, summarize, transcribe, interpret, do whatever you want, as long as you buy the podcast, repackage it, give it back to me. You want to put some hot pictures of hot women on the video like Sandman does? As long as you license them properly or they're public domain, knock yourself out, right? Do all that. Do whatever you want with what I've said, with what I've done. Do whatever you want. Then send me back the video. I will show you how to send me a video, and I'll put it up on the channel with ads. And you can take full credit for the upgrade of the video. And you can have your name on it, all you want, okay? And so if you want to offer advice, that's what I say to you. Take my words, do whatever you want, repeat it back. People say you should have shorter videos, you should summarize it, you should do this, you should do that. Knock yourself out, do whatever you want. I'll post it to the site, right? Now, if you think you have a great story in your life that you would like told on my channel, then write it out and submit it to me for consideration. If I accept it, and it's going to go on the channel, then you can narrate it yourself or I'll narrate it for you. That's really up to you. Any young man who wants to give me useless free advice, my offer and challenge is for you to create a better video yourself and make it available for me to put up on the channel, okay? And by that, I mean I do not want useless, unsolicited free advice. And I hope I made that pretty clear just now. Now, here is an open offer to those who want advice from me. Naturally, if you want me to make a podcast to answer specific questions based on the stories of my life, you're welcome to offer me $20 to do so. I'll put the offer on Amazon. Further, if you want me as a coach in your life, I'm quite happy to do that for 60 Australian dollars an hour currently. Maybe that'll go up in the future, because 60 bucks an hour is very cheap. So if you want to be a coach, you want me to sit down and listen to you, I will listen to you for as long as you like, for as long as you want to talk, if you pay me 60 bucks an hour. You could dictate the dictionary to me for 60 bucks an hour, right? I don't care what it is you say. Now, if you actually want coaching from me, then I'll coach you as well, also for 60 bucks an hour. Now, one of the most amazing things I see is how men pay for therapy. Quote, therapy. You have no idea how many people have suggested that I get some form of therapy, meaning pay some idiot far too much money to pretend to listen to me. No, thank you very much. I had more than enough therapy at Landmark Education to last me a lifetime, okay? But if you young men think that you need therapy, if you young men think that you need a coach, and I suggest that a lot of you do need a coach, I'm available for 60 bucks an hour. You can buy my podcast, read my books, it's all practically for free. You want my time, pay me, just like a taxi driver. Taxi drivers make 60 bucks an hour when they've got a passenger in the car. So the summary. And so there we have it. During this presentation, I have gone over 1. The intended audience of the channel. 2. Why I present stories of my life. 3. The reason behind me creating this channel. 4. The purpose of the channel, which is highly related to the reason for creating it. 5. How the channel will be organized. And 6. How the channel will be monetized. I will now get on and start recording the stories of my life and releasing them as and when it makes sense to do so. I hope these are of value to you. I hope you get great value out of them that there is. I hope you tell all your young friends about them as well. Questions and comments in the comments section below. Let's get going, hey? Thank you very much for listening.